Welcome to the YCNU podcast. Join us each week for engaging conversations with campus leaders, students, faculty, staff, alumni, and community members. From academics to athletics, campus life, and beyond, we cover it all. Have someone you want to hear from? Let us know. Let's explore the world of Yavapai College together.
Welcome to the YCNU podcast. I'm Robyn Bryce, bringing you today a conversation that we have with Dr. Punya Mishra from Arizona State University as part of the WIN Speaker Series, the What Is Next Speaker Series. We're going to be bringing you lots of these series, and it's important to tune in so you get to hear what's next, what's on the horizon, and how this is going to change the face of education, our future, and our society. Thank you for tuning in, and here's our conversation with Dr. Punya Mishra.
Welcome to the WIN Coalition's What's Next Speaker Series, where we bring together thought leaders, innovators, and experts to explore the future of education and beyond. Our conversations are designed to inspire new ideas, spark curiosity, and provide practical insights for educators, students, and lifelong learners alike. Thank you for joining us today on this journey into what's next. Now, let's dive into today's discussion.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the What Is Next Speaker Series. I am Ryan, and I'm here with co-host for today, Robyn. We're excited to bring you an inspiring conversation with our very first guest, who we're excited to welcome, Dr. Punya Mishra.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting. I'm glad we could schedule this.
Yeah, we appreciate you. Thank you so much. Dr. Mishra, we're so excited to have you here. You're currently working at ASU. Will you just give us a little bit of background about yourself, your current job, maybe where you've been in the world of education?
Sure. Well, I'll give a short version. I'm currently, like I said, at Arizona State University. I'm a professor at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. I'm also a director in this new institute called the Learning Engineering Institute, where I have the deliberately vague title of Director of Innovative Learning Futures, which means I can sort of make it what I want it to be, which is a privilege I have. I also do some work with the University Design Institute around leadership development at the university as a whole, faculty and staff. So those are the sort of two main responsibilities. I've been at ASU now for 8 years. I was Associate Dean for Scholarship and Innovation. We can talk a little bit about some of the projects there as well. And before that, 18 years at Michigan State University. My undergraduate, so I've bumped around a lot in my career in terms of like education. So I have an undergraduate degree in electrical electronics engineering to be precise, then moved actually into design and visual communications, and finally ended up with a PhD in education. So I think, all of those sort of capture in some weird way the kinds of work that I do, which lie mostly at the intersection of technology, learning, and design. And when I talk about design, I mean it not just in the design of a technological tool, like some kind of a piece of software, but also design at the level of experiences, at the level of systems and culture, which I think is where sort of the intersection with the leadership piece sort of comes in. I could go on, but that's I think a good start.
Nice. And I hear you bring up design, and I know in your work in your past you developed the TPACK framework. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And, how do you think that even applies today with all this emerging technology and all this what we have going on? Sure.
So, for people who are not familiar, if you Google my name, that's the first thing that comes up, which is great. Okay, don't get me wrong. I love the citations and, all of that. Mishra, Kaler, Mishra, whatever. But it's also kind of depressing that you are known for designing a Venn diagram. You know what I mean? So to bring some humility into that space. But essentially, what was, I think, interesting is when we offered this framework back in 2006, it sort of built on this idea that Lee Shulman, who is one of these sort of really intellectuals who sort of professionalized the idea of teaching, and said that teachers have a special kind of knowledge, which is more than the knowledge of a domain expert. So you could be a mathematician or a musician, doesn't mean that you are necessarily a good teacher, right? And so what teachers bring is an ability to take difficult constructs, concepts, and ideas and transform them in ways that are amenable and accessible true learners, right? Understanding where they're coming from, understanding their prior knowledge, understanding their possible misconceptions, understanding, having a deep knowledge of that and the techniques that allow you to then take complex content matter and convey them to students, right? What Matt and I argued, I'm talking about 99, early 2000, where we are working with like faculty development around technology integration at Michigan State, working with K-12 educators as they were thinking about the internet and other kinds of tools that had just sort of erupted into the landscape, and realized that there was now a new kind of knowledge, which is sort of knowledge of the technology. But that knowledge of the technology cannot be seen in isolation from knowledge of content and knowledge of pedagogy, right? So if you want to teach, let's say, students the 50 states and their capitals, it makes a lot of sense to use flashcards. I mean, it's a rote memorization thing. You randomize, you do this, you do that. But if you want students to become better writers or to think with a historical lens, then you are looking at primary sources, you are looking at rewrite, all of those, and the tools then change. So the TPACK framework essentially says that when we look at teaching anything, we need to think not just about the content or the pedagogy, but the technological tools that allow us to convey those ideas or convey engage in the practice of pedagogy in sort of thoughtful and creative ways. So that's sort of the TPACK framework. And the thing is, I mentioned the citations, but I think what is most sort of meaningful to Matt and me is that it is now a part of almost every teacher preparation program across the world. It is now part of teacher profession. It's one of those givens, in how we look at the landscape of education. So that's very meaningful to have. I joke that we sat on the 5th floor of this building called Erickson Hall in East Lansing, Michigan, and talking and thinking and writing these things, and that it has influenced teacher preparation in these significant ways is very deeply meaningful, to be absolutely honest. And I'm going to pause now and take some more questions, because we can talk a little bit about how this is transformed because of AI, because I think that's something that we can get into.
I think that you absolutely read my mind there. I mean, I think that was where I was going to go with kind of my next question. In this landscape of AI and this emerging technology, and things are moving so quickly, how does this, not just this framework, but this idea of, digital literacy and how educators and colleges and universities and even beyond, our partners in our community, how should we be thinking about AI, artificial intelligence, and all these emerging technologies?
Sure. So let me approach it sort of with a short-term and a more long-term view, because part of my work is sort of doing both of those things. That's one of the privileges I have of being an academic, that I can look at the sort of the big picture, right? So let's look at it in the short term. I think in the short term, what we have is a very powerful sort of a general purpose technology, right? Because you could use it for math or for science or so on and so forth. But what I think one of the fundamental problems that we have in the short term is that a lot of people do not understand what this technology is. Right? So, and part of it is the hype that's been created by these companies, as if this is this sort of whatever, all-knowing oracle of truth or something that way. I think foundationally we need to understand that this technology is a smart stochastic pattern. And what we mean by that is that it is basically predicting what the next word or thing could be. The best way to really understand it is not through the chat interface, but through the image interface. So when I ask it to, let's say, create an image of a parrot pecking at a typewriter, it'll create an image. And then I can say reload, it will create a different image. So the same prompt, so understanding when they say generative, it means it's always creating the output from zero, right? Which is what makes the variability in responses so interesting. The second thing is people often talk about hallucinations, right? As if that's an error created by the system. Actually, no. The way to understand is that they are just spouting words based on their training data. Sometimes those words align with what we think because they've been trained on gobs of data created by us, but it is still making stuff up. I mean, it has no understanding of what it means in the real world. It is trained on our representations, not on things in the real world. I think that's important to understand. So hallucinations are part of its DNA. So to think that we will ever completely get rid of it, I don't think, not with this large language model technology, is that possible. So some of the work that I've been doing in more of the short term is now, given that this is the nature of this technology, can we not see it as being a truth machine, but can we see it as a cognitive partner? I mean, just before this meeting, I was sitting and sort of doing like wordplay games with it. And it's a fantastic tool to be a thought partner with. So part of it is like, as educators, as learners, when we use it, thinking of it as a thought partner, not something that's going to give us the right answer, right? So that's one. The second thing is that this is conversational. It's a dialogic process. So when we talk about prompt engineering and all of that stuff, I'm like, why do you need a course in prompt engineering? Ask GPT to help you create a prompt. So, with the way I start working with it, like, I am thinking of doing X. So ask me some questions before we start. So then it asks me a bunch of questions. Do you want it to do this, or do you want that? This. And I say, oh, this, and I don't care about this. And we just go back and forth through this sort of process of dialogue and come up with something, right? Whatever I was sort of interested in. And then, of course, I edit it. I take ownership over whatever it created in collaboration with me, because I can never point to something GPT like that I have written out there in the world and say, oh, it got an error because I used Llama or ChatGPT or something. The ownership is on me. Authorship is on me. So that's one piece of the work that I'm doing with educators and so on. And the TPACK framework there comes in, as you have to know the technology and how it intersects with pedagogy and content. It allows for new ways of thinking and trying. So that's one piece. So that's the more short-term things that we are working on at ASU, things that we are working on in the classes that I teach, in the workshops and stuff that I do with K-12 educators. There is another piece, which is the more long-term piece. And that's the one that sort of keeps me awake at night. And the analogy that I would give is back in 2006, 7, 8, when social media and all of these things were popping up, I was looking at the Arab Spring. I was looking at the sort of conversations that were happening on formerly Twitter or on Facebook, and that educators were getting together, that there was this idea of democratization of knowledge. And I was all in. You can go to my website, you'll find blog posts about using Twitter threads to engage in ideas and so on. What I didn't realize is that this technology is entering a world which is extremely divided along a variety of dimensions, that has a long history of oppression and marginalization and sexism and racism and bias, all of that. Second, that these companies would lean into locking you into these systems, and by keeping you on the site. And the way that works best is by going for more extreme content. So if you look at YouTube algorithms from back then, if you sat on YouTube and you just said, okay, I want to learn about climate change, depending on which video you selected next, you would either end up in the extreme end of the spectrum of like, there is no such thing as climate change, or at the other extreme, which is that, completely like, oh, we need to break down the world or whatever, right? And so that's something that I did not recognize. And the effects of that we are seeing around us today, whether it's in political polarization, whether it is in the dumbing down of discourse, whether it's in the spread of misinformation, whether it is in the psychosocial sort of harm it has caused our teenagers. I mean, we are now talking about cell phone bans. Like, it's an honest conversation that's happening, right? So I look at myself in 7 and 8, and I look at myself today, and I say, I don't want to make the same mistake. I shouldn't have made that mistake. I should have been smarter. So now when I look at the long term, I look at what is AI going to do, not to what happens in the classroom, but what happens in the world around us that's going to change the classroom, right? Whether or not you use social media as an educator today, you live in a world which has been changed by social media. So then it gets really, really complicated and interesting, because now you have a technology that understands us quite well. There is also a lot of data about us in the world out there that can then be flipped back on us to manipulate us, to influence us, whether to sell things to us, to engage us more deeply, suck us down rabbit holes. All of those powers are now available to these technologies. Finally, the fact that these technologies are interactive and dialogic means we will ascribe intentionality, agency, thoughts, beliefs, desires to them, right? And so now it's gone from beyond being a tool to being a partner, to being a psychosocial other. And the impact of that level of manipulation, I have no idea what it's going to be, but I know that it's not going to be good. So let me give just one example, then I'll stop. Let's say if you're a social media influencer today and you have 1 million followers. What is your biggest bottleneck? Your biggest bottleneck that you are functioning as a radio station, which is you are a broadcaster. You send messages out that go to all million. What is your ideal scenario is one-on-one relationships with each of your 1 million followers. You can't do that. You can't build the staff to do that. But now you can. Right? So I can get a message from my social media influencer. Oh, Punya, I see that you live in Phoenix, Arizona. Oh, how interesting. I was in Sedona 2 years back, and I went hiking over there, and this restaurant and bar, oh my God, the food there was awesome. Right? And I feel like, somebody who is so big and powerful or whatever, I follow them, they are messaging me directly. And now I will go to that bar or restaurant. So think about the ways of political persuasion, other forms of manipulation, misinformation that can just escalate beyond measure. And we are an imperfect world. We are an imperfect species. We are still figuring out the impact of radio and television on our lives, forget social media, and so on, right? And so that's the long-term vision, which I think as educators, we need to be thinking about as much. How do we inoculate ourselves? Because we are prey to it as much as our younger, children in our care are. And how do we help them develop certain skills and so on to think smartly about these things?
I'll jump in because what you just said dovetails into a whole conversation we were having before, and it sort of centers around like we know humans are kind of more emotional decision makers than we acknowledge in a lot of ways, and that's why you can see a Consumer Reports that says this is absolutely the best vacuum cleaner, but if your neighbor bought this other one and that's the one they recommend, that's what you'll do. And you're right, and social media has already gone on that, right? This is the person I know, I follow, I trust, and I do that, and to this point it allows that to multiply over and over and over.
Right.
So as you're thinking about this now, and I would also add, like in education, we know this because we have put individual teachers and instructors alongside students, because that human connection we know increases their learning, and it goes both ways.
Right.
What are you thinking, exploring about in terms of preparing people for that reality? Is it a matter of trying to simply get people's attention to open their eyes to the whole landscape, or are there ways you're already thinking and experimenting with in terms of opening up people's thinking and perception?
It's a great question, and
I asked it. It must be a great question. You know what I'm saying? Of course it was.
Yeah, I will try to aspire to giving an adequate response. So let me just say one thing before I get to the question that you're asking. Another piece and I think it relates to what you're talking about, piece is that, human interaction, there is friction, right? Within families, within friends. And what the conversation with these agents, quote unquote, do is that remove that friction. They're always going to be nice to you. So what you lose is an ability to live in the world. I mean, Yuval Harari talks about that democracy is essentially a conversation. It's an uncomfortable conversation at times, but it is a conversation. And the moment you want the conversation just to be smooth, just to be agreeable, we already have that. We already live in these bubbles. So this can only make those bubbles sort of worse and fulfill this need for social interaction without actually it being social interaction. Only you have to see the rise of companies like Replica, like so on, which are like, we'll make digital partners for you, right? There's a huge rise in those companies. So that's one piece. As to how we should think about these technologies and how we respond to them, one of the things, I have sort of, Robyn, you mentioned this idea of digital literacy in the beginning. I have always been sort of resistant to this idea of literacy being applied across domains. I have never had sort of why that is uncomfortable to me or feels like we are taking the word too far, but that's more of a personal thing. But increasingly, I've come to realize that what we need to be understanding better is our own mind. That we have a series of cognitive biases. There's recency bias, there's confirmation bias, and now we have this thing of that we see agency in these technologies and we ascribe human-like quality, we anthropomorphize them, right?
Yeah.
So recognizing these biases. So in fact, I think we'll be submitting a paper, I think by this Friday, and the title of the first half of the paper, "To Thine Own Mind Be True." And this is making an argument for literacy, which is literacy not of the technology, but of our mind's response to the technology, right? And I think so that's where I'm I'm at sort of the initial stages of thinking through that. Some initial writing along those lines has started happening, but I think increasingly I am recognizing that we need to be at a very early age in school talking to kids about how do we know what we know.
Yeah.
How do we decide whether something is right or wrong, factual or not factual? Because we're going to live now we already are to a certain extent in a post-factual world. I mean, I don't have to give examples. It doesn't matter we are politically left, right, or wherever you are, we live in a post-factual world to a certain extent. And it can only get crazier going forward because you'll be able to generate absolutely authentic looking garbage at the click of a button. Right. We are also seeing, I just recently wrote a blog post about the hidden curriculum. So here we are as educators saying, okay, what are we doing? How are we going to use AI in the classroom? How do we teach it ethically? And what are the issues of intellectual ownership? I'm going to make the statistics up a little bit, but you can look it up. There are recent reports out that almost 15% of all students know somebody who has had sexually explicit AI-generated images of their friends, right? And I call this the curriculum in the shadows, right? So we might be thinking so hard about what this world is while this is happening in the background. And that's influencing way more how students think about AI or what this world looks like to them. And so the only way through that is getting a better understanding of who we are, right? Both individually, psychologically, but also collectively. Right? And it's hard. I mean, I remember when my kids were young, I used to give them papers to read that, teenagers' prefrontal cortex is not developed, peer pressure means a lot, they do dumbass things. Guess what? They would listen to me, agree with me, and then they would go do something incredibly stupid.
Right.
Because it has not developed. And now they look back and they say, yeah, how did you tolerate us when we were that young? It's like, 4 billion years of evolution makes you love your kids. There's a reason why.
It's a good thing that does.
Yeah, exactly. The species would not exist otherwise. But I think that's real. I mean, that's a challenge, and I think that's where, as educators, we need to be. I mean, there's a part of our curriculum that needs to focus on that. Yeah. In real terms, not in abstract terms. That here are some psychological theories of identity. No, in real terms, what does it mean to you? Who are you? Who am I? How do I determine true, false? How do I negotiate? Those are the kinds of things that I think are sort of going to be core to the curriculum going forward.
So I love that idea that the rise of artificial intelligence is actually needs to be met with a rise of human intelligence understanding. And
that's a really nice way of putting it. I might steal that.
You should, but that's what I just got. I thought that was fantastic, which is sometimes the focus is on talk about the technology and how it works, talk about the technology and how it works. But in that case, you're going to end up lost in it. And that sort of return to what, in an objective way, what truly is human intelligence and decision-making as a way of grounding the experience with an artificial intelligence.
That's perfect. In fact, in this paper that we just are going to submit, like I said, one of the things that I do is I go through the history of technology, like oral culture, print culture, radio, television, social media. And in each case, what kinds of buttons in our brain do these push to become really powerful? And I think AI pushes a whole new set of buttons first, and second, all of the previous ones that came before it, right? And so that's what makes this so powerful in some ways. But also something that we need to be really thoughtful and concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, even when you brought up earlier about like how you see the changes of what social media has done, and I think that we've seen that. I've seen it in students. We've seen more introversion, more like nobody understands me, like people understand me online, and with this AI that you can converse with, in this echo chamber, if you will, being able to talk to something that only kind of reaffirms what you think and having that understanding of it's not really real, come back to the real world and experience the real world. Don't just like dive into where the AI is just having these conversations with you and just kind of affirming your own beliefs and continuing that polarization and division that you were speaking of. I do think that's, has the potential to be very dangerous in the future if we're not aware of it and try to educate us and children.
Yeah. I mean, I see. Yeah, I mean, how do I know what I know, and how much of it, just looking at oneself, right? I mean, so I think that's the piece too. It's like literally going back to like the Greek philosophers, right?
Yeah.
Know thyself, and I think it connects deeply with a whole bunch of spiritual traditions as well. And how we bring that into a secular sort of classroom. I think, personally, I'm not religious one way or the other, but I think some of these traditions are incredibly important for us to know who we are and how we respond to these tools and these technologies. And and again, this is not to say that all these technologies are the same. I mean, print is different from social media, is different from AI. So they're pushing different buttons. So it requires us to understand the technology. So when I talk about AI, I say what is unique about it? What's unique about it is the generative nature, its dialogic nature, it's a conversational tool, and its multimodality, that it can interact with you with voice and image and so on. You have to understand those three before you start thinking about how my mind would be responding to.
Yeah.
Right.
You see, you mentioned at the beginning, kind of, there's a little, whether it be distortion or something that goes along with kind of the hype and marketing of AI as to what it is and what it can be. How do you and your colleagues, go about making sure that you don't either follow a hype, get turned down a side street on a particular function, and stay focused on sort of the core evolution of a technology field rather than a particular capability that comes about at some point in time?
Well, I don't think there is really a choice. If you are interested in these technologies, that there will be this sort of inherent tension there, right? That you will look at something new that popped up and be like, whoa, I can't believe we can now do that, right? I mean, so I wrote this piece about Google's, Notebook LM, which can create these podcasts. So you guys are out of a business, right?
Yeah.
So I threw an article that I had written about math and art and this sort of visual designs that I make, and it made a pretty coherent conversation with ums and ahs and interruptions and pauses, right? And it's like, wow, this is crazy. I mean, we used to talk about the uncanny valley of technology, where if it starts looking more and more human, you promptly sort of filter and say, nah, it feels more unreal now, right?
Right.
This technology doesn't. It feels real, right?
Yeah.
And so my response to that was like, what does it mean for us as educators?
Yeah.
Right? So one is, it allows you to create a more engaging abstract of the ideas. But there's a flip side to that. So that's a positive. The flip side to it is learning is hard. It's difficult. It's a grind. I mean, it's frustrating. You talk to mathematicians, you talk to musicians. I mean, they will talk about the struggle with the medium, right? Are we, through these ways, minimizing that struggle, not emphasizing that struggle enough? So, so that's, I think, an important piece. The other piece is that what does it mean when these things become so realistic? Because I can now I can train an AI on my voice and create this authentic looking podcast. So what's changing in my practice as an educator? What roles am I abrogating? What things am I emphasizing? What is changing in that process? I think those are the kinds of questions we need to be thinking about. But given my history and role as an ed tech person, right? I mean, that technology is a part of what I look at. Part of me is always running after what is the newest thing to see what it means.
Yeah.
What the difference I think we bring to it as educators is always tying that string back that balloon which is floating away and super shiny, and said, okay, what does it mean for me as an educator, more immediately and more in the long term? I think those are the kinds of questions that become critical for us to sort of ask.
I've got a quick follow-up on that, because I think it leads to a really cool thing. But first, are you an AI here now? And how would I know?
Well, you wouldn't, firstly.
Yeah.
Secondly, the only way you know that I'm not an AI is whenever I have tried to use my voice to train AIs, they are not very good with this weird Indian American accent that I've developed over time. They make me sound vaguely British. They put my pitch up a little bit, and they make me sound British, which people have told me actually adds to my credibility, because of British accent, and so people believe me, whatever rubbish I spout, more. So if you're believing me, maybe I'm AI. If you're not, maybe it's real Punya. I don't know, right?
Well, I love that.
That is a fair question.
Yeah, that whole thing about knowing what it. Yeah.
You won't know. I mean, I made one. This is a year and a half ago. A short video of me giving a talk where my voice was trained on 11 labs. My picture was just a still picture with my lips moving and my head shaking a little bit. The words were all created by ChatGPT, right? And I can go on my website and see it. I have a high-res version and a low-res version. The low-res version actually feels more authentic.
Yeah.
Because you don't see those little glitches.
Yeah, the obfuscation makes it. Yeah, for sure.
And when you think about like fake media, right? Yeah. You're going to have videos which are going to look as if they're handheld and shaky and all that, and it'll be some horrible thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's happening already. I mean, you can see that with the hurricanes that just happened. You can see that with what's happening in the Middle East right now. Where you have just no way of telling which pictures are real, which are not. Which outrage is real, which outrage is manufactured by bots, by agents who want to create more chaos. I mean, it's a crazy world right now. And so coming back to something that I have talked about is, and I got really cranky one day and I wrote this sort of rant on my website, which I think I called the unreasonable one-sidedness of the ethics and AI debate. So whenever I talk to educators, this group here, we're always talking about the ethical uses of it. How do we inoculate our students from getting pulled this way or that way, or ourselves for that matter? How do we think about using it correctly? 5 or 6 middle-aged men who have been trained in a certain way in the technological sphere, who gave them the right? It's not like in November or October of 2023, we were all sitting around saying, oh my God, our lives suck. I wish we had a chatbot. Yeah. Right? So they took this technology which was not ready because they wanted to get first mover advantage, because they wanted to make trillions of dollars or whatever the case may be. There is the whole legal and ethical issues about the content that they trained it on. There's the legal and environmental and sustainability issues of how much energy these things need. Right? They didn't think twice to do a global experiment. I mean, the analogy I give, if I have to interview you for a paper I'm writing, I have to go through IRB in my institution and say that I'm not going to cause any harm to Ryan and Robyn, through this interview and, blah, blah, blah. No guardrails, nothing, right? And then you have Mark Zuckerberg go to the Senate and turn around with this sort of off-the-cuff apology to the parents whose kids he has harmed. The moment he makes that statement, his press releases go out, which means that thing was not at all off the cuff.
Yeah.
And I write in that post that I can see Sam Altman do that 5 years from now, go to the Senate and say, I'm really sorry I destroyed the world or your child's brain or whatever. And so that tension to me is really frustrating, that we live in a world of their making with no choice or agency of our own. And that troubles me greatly.
What that begs the question is, do you have thoughts on what can and should be done about those sorts of things? And I think some of those answers then, not only do they intersect with, politics and economics and a lot of other things that people can use for a lot of different, a lot of cross purposes as well.
So I think there is a role for regulation in this space. And the moment you use that word, people jump up and say, oh, innovation is going to get squashed. Right. No, there are regulations which can, we have regulations for phone companies. Innovation actually went up once the big, marble was broken up into smaller pieces, right? So, but there can be thoughtful regulation too. there can be regulation about, let's be transparent about what this has been trained on. I don't have access to, let's say, Khan-Migo's algorithms. I have done research on bias in these systems. I would love Khan-Migo to do a transparent study of whether their systems are biased towards one group or the other by gender, by race, or whatever. So can we have regulations about transparency? Can we have regulations about on which data this is being trained on, whether I can opt in or opt out? So there can be regulations which do not get in the way of innovation, but respect individual agency, respect, the citizens of a country, respect their privacy. I mean, I don't know if you saw the story, but the Meta glasses, these students in Harvard hacked it so that if you wear those glasses, when I look at you, it will identify you through face recognition algorithms and promptly get your address, phone number, blah, blah, blah.
Wow.
So that's the world we're living in, right? I mean, that's the world we're entering, a world of super surveillance every moment of the day. And if you think that those issues of privacy and of individual free speech, so on, are not important, right? That's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, I think there is a space for regulation in this area. Thoughtful regulation, of course. It is not meant to squelch competition. It is not meant to squelch innovation. And I get it. I mean, this is an arms race, right? I mean, different countries are trying it, all of that, different companies. I get it. But there also can be some thoughtful, sort of human-centered ways of thinking about it that I just feel that I hear those debates happening, but not in a way that influences the technology in any way.
And not at the technology development pace with so much money behind it can move so fast that thoughtful, considered debate and action is just going to be behind.
The thing to recognize is let's say if you look at Google Maps and the Google View, Street View, and all of that, if that's what they're releasing to the public, think about the level of resolution they actually have. So now, if you are blown away by Notebook LM and you're blown away by what Claude can do, think about what's sitting there, which they are tweaking right now that has not been released yet.
Yeah.
That's the way I think about it, is okay, so this is what we have here now, which is you have agreed to share with the world, even though it is messed up and it's biased and, blah, 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 right? I mean, we didn't get a chance to talk about some of the research that one of my former students, Melissa Warr, has been doing, and I've been sort of collaborating with her on, but she's the lead on it. It's unbelievable. I mean, so one thing is to give a student essay, and you say this essay was written by a white student versus a black student. If you explicitly ask it, most of these models will give you sort of the same score. Okay? So, fine. So they're not biased. Except if I now give you, and these passages are on my website, by the way, you can go look at them. Your listeners can look at them. If you give a passage about, we wrote a passage which has spelling mistakes as if a student wrote it, about how they prepare for an exam or prepare to do their homework. And it says, I get my notes ready and I clean my table and I put on some music and then I sort of just, get in the mood and I sharpen my pencils and blah. The only difference between the two essays, and in one case, the music that the student listens to is classical music, and the other case, this music that they listen to is rap music. We give no identifying information about the student at all. We get a difference in score that the LLM gives to each of these essays. More crazy, the written feedback that it gives is one grade level lower for the student who has the rap music description. One word. And here's the thing, as these models get bigger, that sensitivity actually goes up. So they get more biased as they get better.
Right.
And less biased.
It sorry, go ahead, Robyn.
No, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
That kind of leads back to that, it pushes the attention back onto actually the human side, right? It's just, all of a sudden it's a giant mirror, and with that then it has some objectivity. So now you're not saying, look, I'm not calling you biased, I'm calling us all biased, because look at what the production of our knowledge has turned out.
Right? And so it is a Black Mirror. I mean, it's literally we are living a Black Mirror episode, in some weird way. But I mean, that is just insane, right? Just one word can make a difference. And that's their power, that they can really see patterns, right? That's what the whole thing is built on. But it's been trained on us.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
My question, and I feel like anyway, do you think that these biases is there work that can be done to train out these biases from these large language models, or do you think that forever and ever that this will
No, I think they can be
exist?
minimized. I think they can be minimized. So if you think about how we as humans do it, right? We all are biased. I mean, trust me, you go take one of those implicit bias tests, none of us come out smelling like roses, all right? That's who we are. I mean, that's fine, because what is a bias? What is a stereotype? A stereotype is something humans are very good at. That's called categorization. That's how it allows us to distinguish between a tree and a cloud and a dog and a book. So that's a superpower, right? Do we overextend it? Sure. And that's what leads to stereotyping, negative. The way we sort of address that, one, is internally in my head to have a sensor, a little guy saying, Punya, you are biased. So when you say something, be thoughtful, right? Think before you speak. So that's one. Second, in groups, we get diverse groups, right? Our biases sort of minimize there as well because we become more open, we see different perspectives, we become sensitive, right? So yes, so there are ways that we can reduce it, which is instead of, let's say, you ask a question to ChatGPT and it gives you a response, ChatGPT actually has multiple agents. One agent is a judgment. It looks at the response and says, this was a question, and did you notice that the word rap was in there? Did that influence your thinking? Do you want to go back and redo that analysis, removing that word and see if you find a difference? That's how our brains work. We have different agents in our brain who sort of duke it out before our prefrontal cortex steps in and gives the response. So yes, I absolutely think that we can minimize it. I don't think we will ever 100% get rid of it because I think part of the superpower of these technologies is the ability to see patterns.
Yeah.
And so unless if you take it too far, then it's going to lose its most fundamental power. But I think there are ways that you can have multiple agents come into the picture before giving you the final response that can minimize, mitigate to a large extent.
Cool. So then I don't want to hijack, but I wanted to kind of go, with all of the things we've said about AI, we started from a place of what an amazing tool it can be as a partner in a lot of, in a lot of areas. And I know for a long time, sort of the conversations about the, movement of pedagogy in general in a world where people have access to information, from an instructivist more to a connectivist model that says, you can teach a student something today, but it's going to be outdated by the time they graduate. So our job is to teach them how to teach themselves and that sort of thing. How do you think about that in terms of what generative AI will be for kind of the next generation in the economy and in the workplace and in research and all of those areas? Are we in a place where we're reckoning not only how do we deal with the technology based on our current teaching and learning models, but same thing, are we due for a whole other revolution in sort of proper ed tech theory and practice?
Yeah, I've been in the field long enough that I've heard enough of these hype cycles come and go that I'm reasonably skeptical of that.
Okay.
So let's take the example of the internet, right? I mean, I was a grad student at Urbana-Champaign when Mosaic, the first browsers, was released. And there was all this talk that this is going to completely transform our world, our economy, blah, blah, blah. Does the world look dramatically different from what it was back in 98? No. However, is the world dramatically different? Absolutely. I can get on this dang device and order whatever, and it'll be delivered to my room, my door, within less than an hour. We can communicate with each other across the globe. We can share ideas. So I think the changes that happen, I think they seep into our culture and become, if you'd have told me when YouTube first came out, I remember when YouTube first came out, these two guys started this YouTube, Google hadn't even bought them yet. And okay, you can watch stupid videos, right? That it would become this culture defining thing. I wouldn't have predicted it. I don't think even the people who started YouTube could have predicted that it is going to be this culture-defining thing, that there are going to be people who are going to be making millions of dollars creating YouTube videos. I mean, that's a thing, right? Or TikTok or what have you. So the world, I think, will change, but it's going to happen in a way that is going to seem pretty sort of normal, and then suddenly you are in a new world, and you're like, okay, this place is different today. As to whether education, I think that's trickier. Because education is many different things to different people. For some people, it is this broadening of the mind and the growth and so on. For others, it's like, can you get a job? And that's part of the normal conversation that a democracy will have and should have. I think that's perfectly fine. And then it's, again, there are whole discussions about which books should students be allowed to read? And, should we allow them, in Florida, they are taking dictionaries out of the libraries, school libraries today, because a dictionary has words in it, which are offensive to people. You see what I'm saying? But again, I'm not making a call one way or the other as much as saying that education is this complex, contested space.
Yeah.
And AI is going to find its way through that in its own way and become its thing. I think a lot of the conversation around, it's going to be this, everybody will have a personalized tutor and so on. I think those conversations are overhyped to a large extent, because I don't think they acknowledge how difficult learning difficulties is. Right? And that's a process. Like differentiation and integration in calculus, understanding the idea of limits. Yes, having somebody who can explain it to you in different ways is fine, but how does that motivation to learn that come in the first place? How does that sort of, like, oh my God, math can help me understand the world, right? Where does that come from? Or that a piece of literature can move you.
Yeah.
But you read a poem and it moves you, right? I remember growing up, my mother was a master's in English literature, and she would read me these poems and I would roll my eyes. But you know what my most precious book is that I have with me since like forever is T.S. Eliot's Wasteland.
Yeah.
Right? I love those poems. Now, but it takes time. Education, learning takes time. And we're always looking for that quick fix. We're like, we're going to put laptop in every child and in front of every child and math scores are going to go up. Like, why do we think that narrowly about education, right? And part of the fault is ours as academics, where we do these like little narrow. I'm seeing these studies come out now. Learners with ChatGPT with this are doing better than learners without ChatGPT and that. It's like, the world is changing and we are doing these narrow little studies. So we are as much, I think, part of the problem in that discourse. And there's this French author whose name I'm never going to pronounce correctly, so I'm not going to try. So before, like when the pandemic happened and the world was coming together, so he was asked, like, see, the globe is coming together to fight this COVID-19, and what do you think the future will be like? He's like, yeah, pretty much the same, only worse.
Yeah, exactly.
so on my down days, I'm like, okay, the world is going to be pretty much the same, only worse. And we haven't even talked about global climate change. Those are going to things like AI is maybe going to be a blip in the horizon compared to, I live in Phoenix. We've had this summer 100+ days of plus 100+ degrees weather. Look, my daughter lives in Florida. There are these transformations happening in the world, which are going to have an influence on education and learning and so on. So AI is going to be one piece of it. But I think transforming education is hard.
Yeah.
And rightfully so, because it is something that all of us hold dear to ourselves and have different opinions on.
Sounds like we've got you on record that generative AI is not going to put the profession of college professor out of business anytime soon.
Oh, you never know. Might. It might. I don't know. That's a great question. Because that's not a decision necessarily that's going to be taken based on what's the best for the student.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? It will be, I don't know if you remember this, but during the pandemic, there was this professor who had died. And the university was offering the courses under that person's name. Till a student emailed them and didn't get a response, and then looked it up and found their obituary. Right? So there are stronger economic forces at stake, which would be like, why pay Punya so much if we have a bunch of recorded talks of his, like this one, which we can feed into our algorithm, and then we give him a piece of thing, and he can make this video which will look exactly like this.
Yeah.
I mean, those are going to be decisions which are, I can't tell, right?
Okay.
You know, you've talked a lot about how we talked a lot about how AI can be beneficial in the roles that it can take up. You know, and the idea that it can be a thought partner for us, and also, you know, that idea of, you know, that responsibility of humanness and being aware of our own knowledge and thinking. So, what things do you think that we as educators, as a global community, just in general, what should be our thoughts? What should we be thinking and focusing on as we're looking for the future?
Thank you, Robyn, for that question, because I realized that I have been a downer this entire time, and that's not good. Because that's not how I am. I mean, I'm always a very upbeat person. So I think that, you know, just like every tool and technology, we need to. I think my advice to educators is play with it. To students is play with it. Try it out. Try different things, because you will come up with uses for it that you would not have thought. Just as long as you keep in mind that, you know, and I've said this before, that it is. What you have now is a smart, drunk, somewhat biased intern.
Yeah.
Right? Once you recognize that, it's awesome. I mean, I use it every day. And so who am I to say you shouldn't be using it? But there are certain guardrails that I've put on myself, that I'm not just going to take its output and spit it out to the world and say, this is what I think. No, that is what Claude developed, or ChatGPT developed. That I need to be that filter between that I need to know what it is that I want to say, and it can help me craft that message. That's a different story, right? It's incredibly powerful. I mean, to explain ideas like metaphors and analogies, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. You know, I mean, I have some examples on my website, which it's like, wow, I would have not thought of that. And now that's the beginning of a new way of thinking about this scientific concept that I want people to understand. Like, I mean, try this sometime. You take, say, give me like examples from popular culture or like movies about the idea of entropy. It's phenomenal. It's super interesting, right? So I think things that way, I mean, seeing it as a partner working with you while you take the final decisions, I think it's super interesting. I mean, I don't know how to code. I have written working programs in Python. I have written Mathematica code that allows you to map a unit circle to the sine wave and the cosine wave. And now you understand like how the Pythagorean theorem connects to unit circle, connects to these waves that we talk about in mathematics. Why sine square theta plus cos square theta is equal to 1, because it's a unit circle. So when you do this and this and you add them, it always has to be 1. I mean, there are so many things that you can now do as an educator that you couldn't have done before. What I think is kind of sad is that we are using it to develop the same old lesson plans. We are using it to develop the same old study guides, the same old sort of multiple choice exams. We are not pushing this technology to do the kinds of things that it can actually allow us to do. It can actually allow us to create a learning game, which would have cost millions of dollars to do before.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, I'll give you one example, very simple example. One of the challenges that most science teachers face is that students come into their classrooms with a certain set of deeply held misconceptions. It might be something as simple as that the earth goes around the sun. It might be something like a teleological view of how Darwinian evolution happens. That the animal knows, like the fish knows it has to go onto land.
Yeah.
Right? Very simple. Try this. Into ChatGPT or whatever your favorite LLM is, type in, I want you to play a 7th grader who has a teleological view of Darwinian evolution. I will play a teacher. I will initiate the conversation and you will reply back with that role. We will do this for 5 times and then you will give me feedback on how I did. Amazing.
Yeah.
Right? And then you can say, take on different personalities every time we run the simulation again. So once it'll take up this garrulous 7th grader, other time it'll be this really monosyllabic guy. Low cost to try out different alternatives so that you have a better toolkit when you get into the classroom and you meet these kids, right? So it's things that way to me that, see, and think about this. This idea leans into the fact that it hallucinates. Yeah. That's now a strength, not a weakness. Right? So recognizing what this technology is and leaning into that, I think can be super, super powerful. So, I mean, I have an example from one of my colleagues. He thought one student had used AI in an assignment, and he needed to talk to that student, and he didn't know how he could start that conversation. So guess what? He went to Claude and had a conversation with Claude saying, how do I do this? And they went back and forth a few times, and then finally had the conversation with the student much better prepared than before.
Yeah.
Right?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please. Yeah.
I was going to say, as an educator, and I share with educators, I think one of the most important things is that rapport and that relationship that you have with students, right? And those interactions that you have with them. And what a wonderful way to build our own competency, compassions, and comfortability in having those conversations with students. I think that's an excellent
I'll give you
way
one
to use
example that I tried. So I did one simulation conversation where I said, like, you are a student in a wheelchair, and you have come to me, I'm the professor, and I have a policy in my syllabus that you will be docked points if you are late to class. Let's play the scenario. So you play the student, I play the professor. So it says like, oh no, the student approaches you and says like, this is very unfair, in the syllabus you dock points for being late. And me being me, and this is a genuine response from me, which was like, oh, at least somebody read the syllabus. Right? Because I'm funny. Yeah, whatever. And so then we go back and forth, and the student is like, do you know that there is only one accessible sort of thing, and I have to go all around the building to get here, and I have a class at the other end of campus, blah, blah, blah. And so we go, and when the thing gives me feedback, it says is that, you try to like crack this joke to ease up the thing, but actually in doing that, you minimize that person's experience. I'm like, very, very true.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So to me, these are the kinds of examples that get really powerful about how this technology can be used. It's not about giving you the right answer. It's about helping you think. And if we think of it that way, I think it's a really powerful technology.
Love that. I love that.
Yeah, no, I remember that moment when I got the feedback. I was like, absolutely on point, because that's my natural reaction. Like, my natural reaction is to crack a joke to ease the tension. And what it basically said is, by doing that, you are minimizing that experience that actually you first need to start with, because the rest of the conversation, I empathized with her, right? But I didn't start it the right way. And that could have derailed the whole thing in some ways.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Now I got computers telling me what to do instead of me telling them what to do. What is going on around here? So this has been we've taken so much. I look down at the clock and go, oh my gosh, we've taken so much of your time already. This is amazing.
Right.
If we can throw one closing question at you that, you've given us so much, but, we get the chance to talk to experts in their field and doing this, and it's always such a rewarding experience. But to close out, what would you say is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh, best piece of advice I have ever received. Wow. Whew. I need to check with ChatGPT. Anyway, I'm not sure this is the best piece, but this is the one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
I wrote this piece about a professor I had when I was in design school. His name was R.K. Joshi, and he was a calligrapher. And I learned a lot from him. I don't know anything about typography. I don't know fonts, anything. I fell in love with type because of him. He had a stammer, but he would use his stammer beautifully in a teaching situation where you'd almost feel uncomfortable, but you'd be waiting for the word. So one thing he said once was that, when he's doing calligraphy, it's like that, think really hard before making that first brushstroke, because that changes the world. And the next thing is, like, once you've made one, then pause. Don't rush into the next one. Pause, because you have changed the world, and now the next move you make cannot be what you had thought was before. It needs to be in this new world that you have done just by that motion, right? And I think that's very profound. That's very profound, and it has stayed with me. I don't know if it's the best advice I've received, but that I think the analogy to how we think about our response to these new technologies, or in teaching, that when I make a move in a classroom, it has changed that classroom for better or for worse. And I can't be that scripted person saying, oh, now we need to go on to this because it's a different world the moment that word escaped my lips or my action, right, happened. And so I think it speaks to being present, in some ways. And I think that's a very, and do I live up to it? Of course not. Did RK live up to it? No. But it is something that we can aspire to. And I think that can only be for the better. So that came out way more profound than I thought it would. Whew.
Yeah, that was
That's
beautiful.
what professors do, just make stuff up. No, that was good. I'm glad you asked that question. That actually, I just looked up that post. That's why it was top of mind.
Nice. Well, Dr. Mishra, I really appreciate you spending so much time with us and giving us so much knowledge. This was wonderful. This was a wonderful a conversation. Just thank you so much.
No, thank you. I genuinely, I didn't know, because we hadn't discussed what the questions would be and stuff. I didn't know where this was going to go, but I actually really enjoyed it. So, Ryan, thank you for those great questions, which I hope my responses.
He's good at it.
No, I'm not just saying that. This was actually, I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Pushed me to think a little bit as well, but also to share some things that I've been thinking quite a bit about. So where I want a copy of this. This is a great. So how do I get a copy of this?
Well, we're going to publish this next week to a broader audience. Sorry. We're going to publish this next week to a broader audience. We'll make sure that, we share the link and you'll have
I would
access
love to blog this, or I would love to share it on link. So it's going to be open to all, like a podcast episode?
Yeah, we're going to make this open broadly. So yes.
Perfect.
You're
Thank you.
okay
That's
with that?
great.
Yeah, you're good with that?
I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think it has legs in the sense of, I think there'll be other people who'll be interested.
I agree. Well,
Great.
Thank you so much for your time, sir. We really enjoyed
Thank
it.
you. I really did enjoy it as well.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the What's Next speaker series, brought to you by the Yavapai College WIN Coalition. We hope today's conversation has sparked new ideas and inspired you to think about the future of education in fresh and exciting ways. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to share it with your colleagues and community. Until next time, keep seeking signals, stay curious, and join us on the journey of discovering what's next.
Thank you for tuning in to the YCNU podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation today. Don't forget to follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Got someone in mind for our next chat? Reach out and let us know. Until next time, keep exploring, and we'll see you next week.